Lord of the Rings War of Rohirrim is now out, so let's review it. Now, first thing I liked about this, the animation. We have an anime type style of animation, which is different for the Lord of the Rings franchise, but it tells a clever style for the movie and makes for a really creative choice. Just look at this movie and it looks beautiful because of the animation style. Now, this movie is very niche because they decided to go an anime route with the animation, but don't have that throw you off because the animation looks great. Do you know what else is great? The new lead of the movie. Helm is a great add to the Lord of the Rings franchise and is the star of this movie, and she does a really good job making herself the new lead character. If they do make a sequel, continuing off of this film, I will love to see this character again. I want to see what continues after this film, just to see what happens to her. I'm curious to see what her story is throughout the rest of the continuity, and if they make a new trilogy of films just following this character, I'm down for it, because this is a great new add to the franchise of Lord of the Rings. And this movie just feels like Lord of the Rings. And I mean that literally. Like, this movie feels almost exactly like the original trilogy of films. That could be because Peter Jackson is connected to this film, that this film just feels so much alike to the original trilogy when it comes to the score, the action, just how the movie looks. It all feels like Peter Jackson, and he's a producer on this film, so, kind of makes sense that it kind of feels like that. But I'm glad they made this film continue to feel like Lord of the Rings. They didn't try to make its own thing. They kept the score. They kept everything that made the Lord of the Rings franchise Lord of the Rings and continued it here. So it feels exactly the same. Feels like an actual prequel to those movies. Everything you love from the original trilogy is going to be in here, with a few exceptions that I will get to later. And this entire movie is basically teasing you like, oh, you know where that's going. Oh, you know what that is. Oh, you know who that is. Like, this movie knows you're a Lord of the Rings fan, and it's throughout the entire thing. It's basically teasing you with stuff that you know where it's going to lead to.
What does Mordor want with rings?
It's a certain setting, a certain character, a certain plot point. The movie spends its time teasing it to you, but not in the way teasing you like fan service in your face teasing you. Some of it has to do with the plot setting, others don't. One thing might lead to a sequel, but it's there and feels like a prequel to Lord of the Rings because of that. And if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you're absolutely going to eat this up. If you're like a die-hard Lord of the Rings fan, you're absolutely going to love this. This movie is made for the fans of Lord of the Rings. A general audience member, I don't really know exactly how they would react to this film, but a die-hard Lord of the Rings fan is absolutely going to love every second of this movie. But with that being said, I have problems with this movie, so let's talk about it. I have a problem with the pacing of the movie. Now, part of me says the movie was too long. There's some stuff in this movie that could have been chopped up just a little bit in the middle section to make it kind of flow nicer, but the movie also needed to be longer, because I feel like there's some moments in here that they want you to care for a certain character, but you don't care about them because they've only been on screen for about 20 minutes, 40 minutes, so it's kind of hard to care about them when, you're only 40 minutes into the movie. Now, earlier, when I said this feels like a Lord of the Rings movie, I meant that, because the pacing feels like a Lord of the Rings movie, but it wants you to care about these certain characters that you don't care about, because I felt like it just jumped to the story too quickly. A normal Lord of the Rings movie, like Fellowship of the Ring, didn't cut to the plot that quickly. We were like an hour into the movie until it jumped to that plot. Granted, that's a 9-hour story, but this is not. But I still feel like there would have been a way to make you care for these characters a bit more. Besides the main lead and her dad, I guess the villain too, you don't really care for anyone else in this film. And when I said this movie felt like Lord of the Rings, I meant that entirely, except one thing. The story isn't groundbreaking. Original trilogy of Lord of the Rings movie by Peter Jackson. Groundbreaking story. This one is not groundbreaking. It's made for the Lord of the Rings fans, but doesn't have the same impact that the original trilogy had. You will not find yourself thinking about this movie forever. I feel like by next week, I would have already forgotten about this movie. Not entirely, but it just won't stick with me. And just because the story was weak. It wasn't dead weak, but they could have done a lot more to fix it. And just comparing it to the original trilogy, story-wise, is unfair. Because there could have been a lot more they could have done to fix the story. They could have extended this into 2 movies. That could have kind of fixed some of my problems here. But then I felt like that would have just been 2 cash grabs here. This movie doesn't feel like a cash grab, but I felt like splitting it into 2 movies would have kind of made it feel like that. This movie works as a standalone film, but to fix some of these problems, I feel like that could have been an option. But with that all said, Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, exactly what Lord of the Rings fans want. It feels like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Besides the story isn't groundbreaking, but everything after that, when it comes to the new characters, when it comes to just Lord of the Rings in general, it all feels like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. And if you're a die-hard Lord of the Rings fan, I think this is worth checking out.
What does Mordor want with rings?
But anyways, if you like this video, maybe these ones on the side will interest you too. Like, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Goodbye.